The air in the abandoned quarry hung heavy with secrets. Dr. Fiona Halberg knelt on the damp earth, carefully brushing decades of accumulated dirt from a curious formation in the limestone wall. Her practiced hands worked methodically, unveiling what appeared to be deliberate markings beneath layers of moss and grime. Suddenly, her breath caught. A name emerged from the past. Agnes. Then another. Bernadette. As she continued working, 4 more names materialized before her eyes. Lucinda, Miriam, Honora, and Therese. Fiona's hands trembled as she set down her brush. These weren't random markings. These were the names of the 6 nuns who had vanished without a trace from this very town 50 years earlier. In the summer of 1968, 6 Catholic nuns disappeared during a mission trip to Brier Hollow, Kentucky. Their fate became one of Appalachia's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. For decades, speculation ran wild. Some said they fled, others whispered of murder. Many believed they simply vanished into the wilderness that surrounds this isolated mining community. Until now, their story remained buried in forgotten newspaper clippings and local legend. But sometimes the past refuses to stay silent. Sometimes it etches itself into stone, waiting for someone to listen. Welcome to Last Seen Stories, where we uncover America's forgotten mysteries. I'm your host, and today we're exploring a case that begins with faith and ends with 6 names carved into stone. Before we delve into this chilling mystery, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. Are there any unsolved disappearances from your hometown? Hit subscribe and the notification bell to join our community of mystery solvers. Now let's travel back to 1968, when 6 women of faith embarked on a journey from which they would never return. The Sisters of the Sacred Promise lived quiet lives of devotion at their convent in rural Ohio. But in June 1968, 6 of them felt called to a greater purpose beyond their chapel walls. Sister Agnes Delacroix, at 53, led the group with unwavering conviction. The daughter of French immigrants, she possessed the rare ability to command respect without speaking a word. Her steel-gray eyes had witnessed 2 wars and the Great Depression, tempering her faith with practical wisdom. Sister Bernadette O'Malley, 45, carried sunshine in her Irish smile. Former students described her laugh as medicine for the soul. She could coax conversation from even the most reluctant stranger, a gift she believed came directly from God. Sister Lucinda Reyes, 38, had trained as a nurse before taking her vows. The daughter of migrant workers from Texas, her gentle hands had delivered babies and comforted the dying. She carried a small medical kit everywhere, prepared to heal at a moment's notice. Sister Miriam Novak, 34, possessed a quiet strength and untiring compassion that seemed almost supernatural. The granddaughter of Polish immigrants, she spoke little of her past, but devoted herself entirely to service. Sister Honora Flynn, 29, stood as the group's steadfast guardian. Raised in Boston by a police officer father, she approached her faith with the same unwavering dedication to duty. Some called her rigid, but those who knew her recognized her discipline as devotion. And finally, Sister Therese Dubois, just 26, the youngest of the group. Delicate in appearance but unyielding in spirit, she had joined the convent after a troubled childhood that she rarely discussed. Her determination to prove herself worthy often pushed her beyond what others thought possible. Their journey took them from the relative comfort of their convent to a place many Americans had forgotten existed. Brier Hollow, Kentucky, a mining town nestled deep in the Appalachian Hollows, accessible only by a single winding road that seemed to vanish into the mountains themselves. Coal dust coated everything in Brier Hollow, the peeling wooden structures that served as homes, the few vehicles that managed the treacherous mountain roads, even the faces of children who had never known life beyond these hollow walls. The mine had closed 3 years earlier, leaving behind unemployment, poverty, and a deep distrust of outsiders. The sisters arrived in a borrowed station wagon on June 12, 1968, their black habits stark against the gray landscape. They came with modest supplies, second-hand textbooks, basic medical supplies, and boundless determination. Their mission was clear: establish a schoolhouse for children who had never seen inside a classroom and provide basic health care to those too poor or too isolated to seek it elsewhere. Town records show that Roy Blackburn, the owner of the general store, was the first to speak with them. "We don't need charity here," he reportedly told Sister Agnes, "and we sure don't need your kind of religion." Sister Agnes simply nodded. "We're not here to change anyone's beliefs, Mr. Blackburn. We're here to teach children to read and tend to the sick, nothing more." The sisters found lodging in an abandoned company house at the edge of town. The roof leaked, the windows were cracked, and the floors creaked with every step. Yet, by nightfall, they had transformed one room into a makeshift chapel, their quiet prayers floating into the Appalachian night. Not everyone in Brier Hollow viewed the sisters with suspicion. Clara Jenkins, whose grandson suffered from chronic asthma, welcomed Sister Lucinda's medical knowledge. Harold Murray, a former schoolteacher whose arthritis had forced him into early retirement, offered what few books he owned to their cause. But these small kindnesses remained exceptions. Most locals passed by the sisters with downcast eyes or open scowls. Children were pulled away when the nuns approached, doors closed as they walked past. And then there was Reverend Silas Boone. At 47, Boone had appointed himself Brier Hollow's spiritual guardian. His Holy Redemption Church operated from a converted mining office where his thunderous sermons warned against the corruption of outside influences. When news of Catholic nuns settling in Brier Hollow reached him, his Sunday message took a dark turn. "Beware false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing," he bellowed to his congregation. "These women serve a foreign power. They bow to Rome, not to God's true word. Their presence brings darkness disguised as light." His words fell on receptive ears. In a community where tradition provided the only stability amidst economic collapse, the sisters represented dangerous change. With each passing day, the invisible line between those who cautiously accepted the nuns and those who followed Boone's hostile rhetoric grew sharper, slicing through Brier Hollow's already fragile social fabric. Yet the sisters persisted, unpacking their modest belongings and preparing for their first day of teaching. They couldn't have known that in less than 9 weeks they would vanish completely from Brier Hollow, leaving behind only questions, whispers, and eventually 6 names carved in stone. By early July, 8 children regularly attended lessons in the makeshift schoolhouse the sisters had established in their front room. The parents who allowed their children to attend were mostly single mothers or grandparents raising orphaned grandchildren, those with the least to lose in Brier Hollow's rigid social hierarchy. 10-year-old Lily Jenkins learned to write her name for the first time under Sister Bernadette's patient guidance. 8-year-old twins Thomas and Timothy Ward discovered geography through Sister Teresa's vivid descriptions of places beyond their mountain home. And 13-year-old Daniel Cooper, who had already spent 3 years working odd jobs instead of attending school, showed such aptitude for mathematics that Sister Agnes began teaching him algebra. Meanwhile, Sister Lucinda and Sister Miriam established their modest clinic in what once served as the house's kitchen. Word of their medical skills spread cautiously through whispered recommendations. A miner's widow with an infected cut, a young mother with a colicky baby, an elderly man whose mysterious pains had gone untreated for years. They asked for nothing in payment, accepting only what families could spare: a jar of preserved beans, freshly baked bread, occasionally a few precious eggs. This approach slowly won them allies, including Martha Cooper, Daniel's mother, and the town's unofficial midwife. They don't preach at you while they're helping, Martha told her skeptical neighbors. They just help. But as the sisters gained small footholds in the community, Reverend Boone intensified his opposition. His sermons grew more specific, more venomous. They're filling our children's heads with foreign ideas, he proclaimed, teaching them to question the natural order. Next, they'll be telling our boys that coal mining isn't God's plan for them. They'll be telling our girls that a woman's place isn't in the home. In a community where coal had defined generations of men's lives and where traditional gender roles provided structure, these accusations struck deep. Rumors began circulating that the sisters were actually government agents sent to evaluate whether Brier Hollow should be forcibly relocated like other Appalachian communities during that era. The first act of vandalism occurred on July 22nd. The sisters awoke to find their front window shattered, glass scattered across their carefully arranged classroom. A crude message was painted on their door: "Leave or burn." Sister Agnes gathered the others in prayer, then calmly swept up the glass and hung a blanket over the window. Classes continued that afternoon. 3 days later, a dead crow was left on their doorstep, its wings spread in a mockery of crucifixion. Sister Honora disposed of it before the others could see, but her normally stoic expression betrayed her concern. "Perhaps we should contact Mother Superior," Sister Honora suggested during evening prayers. "Request additional support or permission to relocate our mission." Sister Agnes considered this, but ultimately shook her head. "These people need us, whether they realize it or not. Fear often precedes acceptance. We must show them we cannot be frightened away." The sisters adapted. Sister Therese began holding reading lessons outdoors, beneath a sprawling oak tree where the children felt less conspicuous. Sister Lucinda made house calls after dark, her black habit blending into the night as she slipped from home to home. Sister Bernadette started a small vegetable garden, sharing the harvest with anyone who passed by, a silent offering of friendship. For a brief period, tensions seemed to plateau. The vandalism stopped. More children appeared for lessons, slipping away from homes where parents might not approve but wouldn't actively prevent their education. A few more patients sought medical care, arriving with downcast eyes but leaving with grateful hearts. Then came the town meeting on August 6th. Ostensibly called to discuss road repairs, the gathering quickly turned to the nun problem. The meeting hall split visibly, supporters on one side, opponents on the other, with a nervous middle group trapped between. Roy Blackburn, still suspicious but softened by Sister Bernadette's kindness to his arthritic wife, spoke cautiously. "I ain't saying they've done harm, just questioning whether they belong here." Reverend Boone seized the moment. "They don't belong. They never will. Their kind corrupted Europe for centuries before Americans broke free. Now they're here, in our home, corrupting our children with their papist lies." Martha Cooper stood, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "My Daniel can multiply 3-digit numbers in his head now. He talks about college. Before these sisters came, he talked about nothing but getting old enough to find work in the next county's mine. That's worth something." The debate grew heated, voices raised, accusations flew. In the end, nothing was decided except that Brier Hollow stood divided, the rift between neighbors growing wider with each passing day. None of the sisters attended this meeting, but its contents reached them through Martha Cooper's whispered warning the next morning. Sister Agnes listened carefully, then simply nodded. "We've faced worse," she told her sisters that evening. "Remember why we came, not for ourselves, but for those who need us. We stay." What Sister Agnes couldn't have known was that they had only 8 days left in Brier Hollow, 8 days before a violent storm and something far more sinister would erase their physical presence from the community forever. August 14, 1968 began with an unsettling stillness. Birds fell silent. The air hung heavy, charged with electricity that raised the hair on the back of your neck. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had swallowed the sun, casting Brier Hollow into premature twilight. Sister Miriam noticed it first. "A storm's coming," she remarked, as she helped Sister Bernadette collect laundry from the clothesline. "A big one." Weather records confirm her assessment. That evening, one of the most violent summer storms in eastern Kentucky's recorded history descended upon the region. Wind gusts reached nearly 80 miles per hour. Lightning struck with such frequency that witnesses described the sky cracking open. Rain fell in blinding sheets, turning dirt roads into rivers and flooding the lower-lying homes within minutes. The last confirmed sighting of all 6 sisters came at approximately 6:30 p.m. Daniel Cooper had stayed late for additional tutoring, and Sister Agnes insisted on walking him home despite the threatening weather. Martha Cooper reported that all 6 nuns arrived with Daniel, soaked from the short walk, and accepted her offer of hot tea before returning to their house. They seemed worried, Martha later told police. Not scared exactly, but Sister Agnes kept checking the window. Sister Honora stayed by the door the whole time like she was standing guard. After finishing their tea, the sisters departed together, huddled against the worsening storm. Martha Cooper's home stood just a quarter mile from their own. Under normal circumstances, the walk would take less than 10 minutes. They never arrived home. When dawn broke on August 15th, the storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. Fallen trees blocked roads, power lines lay in tangled heaps. The creek that ran through town had overflowed, flooding several homes. Richard Murray, Harold's son, discovered the sisters' station wagon abandoned at the edge of town, approximately half a mile from their intended route home. The driver's door stood open. The keys remained in the ignition. Inside, police found Sister Lucinda's medical bag, Sister Bernadette's worn Bible, and a child's copybook with carefully practiced letters. More disturbing was what they found at the sisters' house. The front door swung open, banging rhythmically against the wall in the post-storm breeze. Personal belongings lay scattered, a hairbrush, religious medals, half-written letters. A pot of soup sat cold on the stove. 6 empty teacups sat unwashed by the sink. Nothing appeared stolen. No signs of struggle disturbed the modest furnishings. It seemed as though the sisters had simply evaporated, leaving behind the vessels of their daily lives. Sheriff Clayton Banks organized search parties immediately. Local men who had been hostile to the sisters just days before now combed the surrounding forests alongside their supporters. State police arrived by noon with tracking dogs. The storm complicated their efforts. Scents washed away, tracks obliterated by rain, landmarks altered by flooding. The only potential clue emerged late that afternoon, a set of multiple footprints, partially preserved in a patch of mud, sheltered by an overhanging rock, led toward the abandoned quarry a mile east of town. The quarry, a gaping wound in the mountainside, had been closed for nearly 20 years following a collapse that claimed 7 miners' lives. Local children were forbidden to play there. Adults avoided it out of superstition. The prints looked purposeful, Sheriff Banks noted in his report. Not the random pattern of someone running or being dragged. 6 or 7 sets, walking single file toward the quarry entrance. The search converged on the quarry, but daylight was fading. Flashlights illuminated a labyrinth of tunnels, ominous shadows, and dead ends. Water from the storm had flooded the lower chambers. The search was called off until morning. By the 3rd day, when no trace of the sisters had emerged, theories began to circulate. Some believed they had been caught in a flash flood and swept away. Others suggested they had fled town, fearing escalating threats. The more suspicious whispered that they had never been nuns at all but government agents who disappeared once their assessment was complete. And then there were those who looked meaningfully toward Reverend Boone's church, though none dared voice these suspicions aloud. Sheriff Banks interviewed Reverend Boone on August 17th. The interview transcript reveals a man defensive yet composed. "I spoke against their teachings, yes," Boone acknowledged. "That's my right as a man of God. But I never called for violence. Never. Ask my congregation." Every member of Boone's church provided him with an alibi. During the storm, they claimed, the Reverend had been leading an emergency prayer service for those whose homes were threatened by flooding. With no bodies, no witnesses, and no concrete evidence of foul play, the investigation stalled. The FBI briefly became involved but departed after a week, citing insufficient evidence of a federal crime. The Sisters' religious order sent representatives who conducted their own investigation, then left with heavy hearts and empty hands. By September, the case had gone cold. The Sisters' house stood empty, their modest possessions returned to their order in Ohio. Their schoolhouse and clinic closed permanently. The children they had taught returned to lives without formal education. The patients they had treated sought remedies elsewhere or suffered in silence. Brier Hollow closed ranks. Questions about the missing nuns were met with averted eyes or abrupt changes of subject. The community seemed determined to forget, as though collective amnesia might erase their complicity in whatever fate had befallen the Sisters of the Sacred Promise. But some secrets refused to stay buried, especially in a town built above tunnels and caves where echoes never truly fade away. For 50 years, the disappearance of the 6 nuns haunted Brier Hollow like a ghost no one would acknowledge. The case file gathered dust in Sheriff Banks's office, then his successors, then in county archives where it was eventually forgotten. Periodic resurgences of interest punctuated the decades of silence. In 1973, a true crime writer arrived to research a book but left after 2 weeks, claiming uncooperative witnesses made the project impossible. In 1980, the Sisters' religious order funded a private investigator whose inquiries met similar resistance. In 1988, the 20th anniversary prompted a brief newspaper article that raised questions but provided no answers. Each time, Brier Hollow's response was the same, a collective closing of ranks. Doors shut, phones went unanswered, memories conveniently failed. Meanwhile, the town itself changed, though more slowly than the world beyond its mountain boundaries. The population dwindled as young people sought opportunities elsewhere. The general store closed, then reopened as a gas station with a small market attached. Reverend Boone's church persisted, though with fewer parishioners each year, eventually passing to his son and then his grandson. What didn't change was the silence surrounding the sisters' fate. It became Brier Hollow's unspoken pact, a subject too dangerous to discuss, as though the very mention might summon something best left undisturbed. The abandoned quarry became central to local superstition. Parents warned children away with tales of the nun ghosts who wandered its tunnels. Teenagers dared each other to enter at night, though few made it past the gaping entrance before their courage failed. Strange sounds, singing, weeping, whispered prayers were reported by those who ventured too close after dark. Over time, these ghost stories replaced actual memory. The real women, their names, their faces, their mission, faded like old photographs, while their spectral counterparts grew more vivid in local imagination. Martha Cooper, who had witnessed the sisters' final known moments, refused to discuss the subject even with her son Daniel, who left Brier Hollow for college in 1976 and never returned. When pressed by visiting journalists in the 1990s, she would only say, "Some things are better left in the past." Roy Blackburn took whatever knowledge he possessed to his grave in 1992. Harold Murray, who had initially supported the sisters' educational efforts, suffered a stroke in 1975 that left him unable to communicate. And Reverend Silas Boone, whose fiery sermons had once condemned the nuns, grew increasingly reclusive in his later years. When he died in 2001, his obituary mentioned his tireless defense of traditional values, but omitted any reference to the summer of 1968. This conspiracy of silence might have continued indefinitely if not for two factors: the inevitable mortality of those who remembered the truth, and the arrival of an outsider uniquely equipped to uncover it. This mystery haunted Brier Hollow for 5 decades. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, hit the like button now. It helps more people discover these forgotten mysteries. The town that Sister Agnes and her companions entered in 1968 had all but disappeared by 2018. The mining company that once employed most residents was long bankrupt. The population had dwindled from nearly 800 to fewer than 200. Many homes stood abandoned, their roofs collapsed, their windows dark. Yet something remained, something buried beneath half-truths and ghost stories, waiting for the right person to unearth it. That person was about to arrive, carrying not religious texts, but archaeological tools. And what she would discover would finally break 50 years of silence. Dr. Fiona Hallberg never intended to investigate a decades-old disappearance. At 42, the archaeologist had built her reputation studying Appalachian mining communities, documenting how industry transformed both landscape and culture. Her previous work focused on artifacts, tools, household items, architectural remains, not unsolved mysteries. Yet Fiona possessed qualities that made her uniquely suited for uncovering long-buried secrets: methodical patience, meticulous attention to detail, and genuine respect for the communities she studied. She approached each project not as an outsider extracting information, but as a temporary steward of stories that belonged to the land and its people. In May 2018, Fiona arrived in Brier Hollow with a small team of graduate students and a grant to document the area's industrial history before nature reclaimed it completely. Her interest lay primarily in the abandoned mine and its surrounding structures, the physical evidence of boom and bust cycles that had shaped countless Appalachian communities. "I noticed something odd right away," Fiona later told journalists. "Whenever I mentioned my plans to explore the old quarry site, locals would change the subject or suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. This happened consistently enough that it couldn't be coincidence." Intrigued rather than deterred, Fiona began asking careful questions, not about the quarry directly, but about Brier Hollow's history. Who had lived there? What events had shaped the community? Gradually, she established rapport with several elderly residents, including 85-year-old Georgia Ward, whose twin brothers had briefly attended the Nuns' makeshift school. Georgia was the first to mention them, Fiona recalled. She asked if I'd heard about those Catholic ladies who disappeared. Her casual tone contrasted sharply with her body language. She literally wrung her hands while speaking, as though expecting punishment for breaking a taboo. This offhand comment sent Fiona to county archives, where she discovered the nearly forgotten case file. Yellowed newspaper clippings documented the initial search. Police reports detailed interviews with townspeople, including many now deceased. Photographs showed 6 women in traditional habits, their expressions serene yet determined. What struck Fiona most forcefully was the abrupt cessation of the investigation. The final police report, dated September 3, 1968, concluded simply, "No evidence of foul play. No bodies recovered. Case remains open but inactive pending new information." It was as though someone had decided the sisters should be forgotten, Fiona noted. Their disappearance warranted a massive search initially, made national headlines briefly, then vanished from record almost as completely as the women themselves. Armed with this historical context, Fiona refocused her research. The quarry, which had been a peripheral interest, became central. Using contemporary accounts and geological surveys, She created detailed maps of the tunnel system as it would have existed in 1968, before 5 decades of erosion and collapse altered its configuration. Her analysis revealed something overlooked in the original investigation: a small chamber accessible only through a narrow passage that would be easily missed without specialized knowledge of mining structures. This chamber, located approximately 300 feet from the main entrance, would have remained relatively protected from flooding even during severe storms. Fiona's most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Walter Boone, Reverend Silas Boone's 78-year-old grandson, had continued his family's religious tradition but rejected its legacy of intolerance. When Fiona approached him, he seemed almost relieved. "Grandfather carried this burden until his death," Walter confided. Not guilt exactly, he maintained until the end that he never harmed those women, but knowledge. He knew something about that night that he never shared publicly. According to Walter, his grandfather had confessed on his deathbed that a group from his congregation had planned to frighten the nuns into leaving town, not to harm them, but to stage what modern parlance would call a scare tactic, confronting them during the storm when the sisters would be vulnerable and isolated. Grandfather insisted he tried to stop it once he realized how dangerous the storm had become, Walter explained. But by then it was too late. The men had already left for the sisters' house. When he found them later that night, they were scared silent. Something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. This testimonial gave Fiona sufficient cause to request permission for a limited archaeological investigation of the quarry site. County officials, initially reluctant, relented when she framed it as documentation of industrial heritage rather than a criminal investigation. On July 8, 2018, almost exactly 50 years after the sisters arrived in Brier Hollow, Fiona and her team entered the abandoned quarry. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive techniques, they began mapping the actual tunnel system as it existed currently, comparing it to historical records. For 3 weeks, they documented, measured, and photographed, finding nothing beyond the expected remnants of mining operations. Fiona's graduate students began suggesting they refocus on other aspects of the project. Even Fiona's confidence wavered. Then came the morning of August 1st. While examining what appeared to be a partial collapse in the chamber she had identified from historical maps, Fiona noticed unusual markings on a relatively flat limestone surface. Initially dismissed as tool marks from mining operations, closer inspection revealed deliberate patterning. Carefully, painstakingly, she brushed away decades of accumulated grime and moss. Letter by letter, 6 names emerged from the stone: Agnes, Bernadette, Lucinda, Miriam, Honora, and Therese. "I literally couldn't breathe," Fiona later described. "These weren't random marks or graffiti. These were carefully carved names, the names of women who had vanished without trace 5 decades earlier. Whatever happened to the Sisters of the Sacred Promise, they had been here, in this chamber. They had left their names behind." The 50-year silence surrounding Brier Hollow's darkest chapter was about to be broken. The sisters, long reduced to ghostly legends, would finally speak through the stone that bore their names. The discovery of the carved names transformed Fiona's archaeological project into a potential crime scene. Within hours, state police and forensic specialists had cordoned off the quarry and established protocols for a meticulous investigation. Initial analysis confirmed what seemed obvious. The names had been carved by different hands, each showing distinct characteristics in depth, style, and execution. Age testing of the limestone surface indicated the carvings were indeed consistent with the late 1960s based on weathering patterns and mineral deposits that had accumulated in the grooves. These carvings weren't made hastily, forensic anthropologist Dr. Elaine Winters noted in her report. They show deliberate care, consistent pressure, They weren't scratched in fear but carved with purpose, as though the makers had time and relative calm to complete their work. This observation raised profound questions. If the sisters had been fleeing danger, why stop to carve their names? If they were victims of violence, how did they have time for such precise work? And why leave only their first names, when including information about their situation might have helped rescuers? Using ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, investigators conducted a comprehensive search of the chamber and surrounding tunnels. What they discovered, approximately 20 feet beyond the carved names, sent shock waves through everyone involved. A partial collapse had sealed off a small alcove. When carefully excavated, this space revealed the remains of a wooden door, not a mining structure, but something that appeared to have been installed later, its hardware dating to the mid-20th century. Beyond this door lay a small room, roughly 12 feet square, evidently carved out or expanded from a natural formation in the limestone. Inside, arranged with unmistakable care, investigators found 6 sets of human remains. The scene bore none of the expected markers of violence, no signs of restraints, no evidence of trauma to the skeletal remains. Each body had been laid out with dignity, hands folded as if in prayer, simple wooden rosaries still intact among the bones. Personal effects helped confirm identities. Sister Agnes's distinctive silver crucifix, Sister Lucinda's medical school ring, Sister Teresa's handmade bracelet crafted from olive wood beads from Jerusalem. DNA testing would later provide final confirmation, but those present had little doubt they had found the long-missing sisters of the Sacred Promise. The physical evidence tells a complex story, Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Robert Chen explained at a press conference 2 weeks later. We found no evidence of violence on any of the remains. No fractures, no defensive wounds, nothing to suggest a struggle. The cause of death appears consistent with asphyxiation due to oxygen deprivation. In layman's terms, the sisters had not been murdered, at least not directly. They had suffocated in a chamber that, once sealed, would have provided only limited oxygen. But why were they there? Had they sought refuge from pursuers? Had they been imprisoned? Or was there another explanation entirely? The impact on Brier Hollow's remaining original residents was profound. Some expressed shock and genuine grief. Others displayed visible relief, as though a weight had finally been lifted. A few refused to comment, maintaining the silence that had defined their community for 50 years. Martha Cooper's son Daniel, now a professor of education in Cincinnati, returned to Brier Hollow for the first time in decades. "I always wondered what happened to them," he told reporters. "Sister Agnes believed I could be more than circumstances had planned for me. I owe her my life's path." Walter Boone faced the most difficult reconciliation, acknowledging his family's role while maintaining his grandfather's claim of innocence in any direct harm. Grandfather's congregation created the atmosphere of hostility, he admitted. They fanned flames of distrust. For that, our family bears responsibility. But I believe him when he said he never intended their deaths. As investigators pieced together forensic evidence, historical weather data, and testimony from aging witnesses, a theory emerged that seemed to fit all available facts. On the night of August 14, 1968, a group of men from Reverend Boone's congregation confronted the sisters as they walked home from Martha Cooper's house. Their intent, according to later confessions, was intimidation, to frighten the women into leaving town. The violent storm provided cover for their actions. The confrontation turned chaotic as flooding suddenly threatened both groups. The sisters fled toward the quarry, either by choice or under duress. The men followed, perhaps to continue their intimidation, perhaps to ensure the women's safety as the storm worsened. Inside the quarry, a partial collapse, triggered by the storm's intensity, separated the sisters from their pursuers. Finding themselves in the small chamber with the carved names, The sisters discovered the wooden door leading to what they may have believed was a safe haven or exit route. Instead, they entered a chamber with no other outlet. When they closed the door behind them, whether for protection from those following or from the collapsing tunnels, they sealed their fate. Subsequent collapses blocked any chance of rescue or escape. Supporting this theory, investigators found church records indicating that Reverend Boone had led an all-night prayer vigil on August 14th to 15th, with several men arriving late and visibly distraught. One entry noted, "Prayers for those lost in the storm," hours before anyone else knew the sisters were missing. The names carved in stone appeared to be the sisters' final testament. Not a cry for help, as initially assumed, but a deliberate marker of their presence, a way to ensure they would not be completely forgotten if their bodies were never found. They must have realized they were trapped, Fiona theorized. With limited oxygen, they would have known their time was short. These names were their final act, not of desperation, but of defiance against disappearing without trace. In the end, what happened to the Sisters of the Sacred Promise wasn't murder in the conventional sense. It was a tragedy born from prejudice, escalated by natural disaster, and preserved by a community's collective shame. On August 14, 2018, exactly 50 years after the sisters' disappearance, a memorial service was held in Brier Hollow. Representatives from the Sisters of the Sacred Promise joined local residents, investigators, and media in honoring the women whose lives and deaths had defined the community for half a century. Sister Rebecca Martinez, Mother Superior of the Order, spoke with remarkable grace. "Our sisters came to serve with love, not to create division. Today, we pray not only for their souls, but for healing in this community that has carried such a heavy burden of unspoken grief." The question of legal justice proved complicated. Most of those directly involved in the confrontation had died years earlier. The three surviving men, now in their late 70s and early 80s, offered conflicting accounts colored by decades of guilt and rationalization. State prosecutors ultimately decided against criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence of intentional wrongdoing and the advanced age of potential defendants. This decision met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as appropriate closure for a tragedy rather than a crime, while others viewed it as justice denied. Perhaps the most meaningful reconciliation came from Walter Boone, who transformed his grandfather's church. The Sunday following the memorial service, he preached on the sin of silence to a congregation that included both longtime members and curious outsiders. 50 years ago, this community chose fear over love, suspicion over welcome, and then silence over truth, he told them. "We cannot undo the past, but we can ensure its darkest chapters teach us rather than define us." For Brier Hollow, the revelation brought unexpected healing. Tourism increased as true crime enthusiasts and religious pilgrims visited the site. Local businesses saw economic improvement for the first time in decades. Some residents complained about the attention, but others recognized it as the town's first chance at renewal since the mines closed. Daniel Cooper led fundraising efforts to establish a permanent memorial and scholarship fund in the sisters' names. "They came to bring education to forgotten children," he explained. "The best tribute is continuing that mission." The personal legacies of the 6 women emerged through archived letters, photographs, and testimonials from those who had known them in Ohio. Sister Agnes's stern wisdom, Sister Bernadette's infectious joy, Sister Lucinda's healing touch, Sister Miriam's quiet strength, Sister Honora's steadfast protection, and Sister Teresa's unyielding determination, qualities that had once threatened a community now inspired a new generation. Their remains were returned to their religious order in Ohio for proper burial, but their names remained etched in the limestone where they had carved them, now preserved behind protective glass for future visitors to witness. In the end, the mystery of the Sisters of the Sacred Promise revealed something profound about human nature. We fear what we don't understand. We silence what we can't face. But truth, like water, finds its way through even the smallest cracks in our defenses. The 6 names carved in stone stand as testament not only to tragedy, but to resilience, to the human desire to leave a mark, to be remembered, to matter. Sister Agnes, Sister Bernadette, Sister Lucinda, Sister Miriam, Sister Honora, and Sister Therese came to Brier Hollow to bring light to darkness. In their final act, they ensured that light would eventually return, even after 50 years of shadow. The Sisters of the Sacred Promise were almost forgotten by history until their names, etched in stone, told their final story. If you want more unsolved mysteries from America's forgotten corners, subscribe to Last Seen Stories now. Leave a comment with which aspect of this case chilled you the most, and share this video with someone who appreciates a good mystery. Today, visitors to Brier Hollow can see a simple memorial where the quarry entrance once stood. 6 stone pillars bear the names and photographs of the sisters, while a small plaque explains their mission and fate. The actual chamber where they died has been permanently sealed for safety, but the wall bearing their carved names has been carefully removed and placed in a protected display case nearby. Dr. Fiona Hallberg still visits occasionally, placing flowers at the memorial and speaking to school groups about the importance of preserving difficult histories. What happened here wasn't just about 6 women who died, she often explains. It was about an entire community that chose silence over truth, and the price everyone paid for that choice. For the residents of Brier Hollow, the sisters' story has become part of their identity, no longer a whispered secret, but an acknowledged chapter in their collective history. Some mysteries may never be fully solved. We may never know exactly what words passed between the sisters and those who confronted them on that stormy night, or what thoughts filled their minds in their final hours. But we know they left their names behind, ensuring they would someday be found, someday be remembered. And perhaps that's enough. Next week on Last Seen Stories, we'll investigate the bizarre disappearance of an entire family from their lakeside cabin in Minnesota, a case where the only clue was a half-played game of chess and a single word scrawled on the bathroom mirror. Until then, I'm your host, reminding you that history's forgotten mysteries are waiting for someone to find them, just beneath the surface of everyday life.